Okay, here we are. Welcome, everybody. Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 28. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining the live stream. If you want to read along with us, the PDF that I'm using can be getting from this website, gurdjieff.work. Scroll to the bottom, go to their library, primary text, boom, all and everything. Let's go. Now, if you want to help support these efforts, support the channel, you can donate via PayPal, sign up to Ko-fi, or become a YouTube member. Anywho, we're going to continue where we left off last week. Chapter 28, The Chief Culprit in the Destruction of All the Very Saintly Labors of Ashiata Shaimash. So last week we were talking about Ashiata Shaimash, his teachings, and now we're going to learn a little bit about Hasna Musens. So I'm excited for this, because it's like it's all well and good to learn about how to do the work, but you also need to know how to fail so that you can avoid doing those things. So let's learn what we shouldn't be doing now. So, you remember that I have already told you that the basis of the initiative for the arising there of the factors which became the causes of the final, so this is Beelzebub talking, the final destruction of the still surviving remains of the beneficent results of the conscious labors of the very saintly Ashiata Shaimash. Gurdjieff doing his usual style here. Thick prose. I can swim through this. It's so thick. For the subsequent generations of your favorites did not issue from the learned beings who were then assembled from almost the whole of the surface of the earth in the city of Babylon, but that these later? Take a shot whenever I say anything wrong, as it had long before become proper to most of the terrestrial learned beings of new formation, were only like contagious bacilli. Bacilli? Okay. The unconscious disseminators of every kind of then existing evil for their own and for subsequent generations. Also, howdy Tyler in the chat. So the basis for all the further great and small maleficent activities and unconscious maleficent manifestations of the learned beings of that time concerning the destruction of even the last remnants of the results beneficent for the three-brained beings there obtained from the very saintly conscious labors of the essence-loving Ashiata Shaimash. So all of his efforts were destroyed. But how and why? Whereas my later detailed researches concerning these further very saintly activities made clear to me the invention of a learned being, well known there in his time, also belonging to the number of learned beings of new formation and named Lentro Hamsanin. So this is a guy, this is a dude, Lentro Hamsan in. Hamsa is interesting. He's got Hamsa in his name. So Hamsa in his name means that he, I guess Gurdjieff is saying he is a being of attainment, Lentro, but he's gone dark. So, as a result of his inner, what is called double center of gravity, his double gravity-centered existence. So this is the clue. This is the key. A Hasnamussen, or someone who is a Hasnamussen, someone who's fallen, someone who's screwed themselves over, has a double center of gravity. So, because what's the difference between going up? Good old Lenti, says Tyler. Exactly. Lenti ruins it all. So what's the difference between someone who's going up, who crystallizes themselves, and someone who just doesn't crystallize themselves? If you don't crystallize yourself, it's like whatever. You just go back into, the flow of creation. But if you crystallize wrong, you screw yourself. So if you crystallize a double center of gravity, it means that there's not one thing. You've crystallized a kind of a multiplicity. There's this tension now, and it prevents you from progressing upwards, because now that there's these two things, you have something, so you've achieved something, but there's something else that's antagonistic and it's stopping you from progress. So instead of crystallizing and moving up the ladder of creation or being dissolved back down, you're just stuck there for all eternity because it can't go down because this other thing's crystallized, holding you from going down, but it's also holding you from going up. So Hasnamusens, they create all kinds of problems, but at the same time, you gotta feel bad for them because they're just stuck, eternally stuck in creation now because of their double-centeredness. So, the highest being part of the presence of this terrestrial three-brained being was coated and perfected up to the required gradation of objective reason. So Lenti, good old Lenti, he coated his higher being bodies, he obtained objective reason. But something else went wrong. So let's see what Gurji says. And later, this highest being part became, as I have once already told you, one of those 313 highest being bodies who are called eternal Hasnamus individuals, and who have the place of their further existence in the universe on a small planet existing under the name of eternal retribution. There you go. Poor Lenti. So what do you say? There's 313. So 313, it's an interesting number. What does that equal? 7? But supposedly there are 313 individuals who are Hasnamusens. And they're eternal Hasnamusens, just in the universe, quarantined somewhere on a planet somewhere so that they can't mess up the rest of the universe. Now, strictly speaking, about this terrestrial three-brained being, Lentrohamsanin, I would have to fulfill my promise and to explain to you in detail about the expression Hasnamus, okay? But I prefer to do so a little later in the proper place of the sequence of this tale. Blue balling us again, Gurdjieff. Damn it, Gurdjieff. The mentioned maleficent invention, or as they themselves, that is, the contemporary terrestrial learned beings name, such an invention of a learned being there of new formation, a composition, or even a creation, was actualized, as I have already told you, 2 or more centuries before the time when my 5th sojourn there. I first reached the city of Babylon, where partly by coercion and partly voluntarily learned beings had been assembled from the surface of almost that whole... Yeah, so he's referencing the king that just got all of the learned men there, all the learned men of the world into Babylon to try and like do some alchemy. So the maleficent composition of that learned being of former centuries reached the learned beings of said Babylonian epochs by means of what is called a God damn it, Gurdjieff. Kashieritlir. How do you... So it's a Kashire Itlir. Kashieritlir. That's what that is. I'm going with that. On which this invention was engrossed by the said Lentrohamsanin himself. I find it very necessary to inform you a little more in detail about the history of the arising of this Lentrohamsanin, and also how, owing to which accidental circumstances of his environment, he later became there a great learned being and authority for his contemporary beings of almost the whole surface of your planet. So it's interesting, he accidentally became. So he didn't via his own will, accidental circumstances external to him did something to him. In addition to this history itself being very characteristic, it can also serve as a good elucidatory example of that practice which has long ago become firmly established in the process of the existence of these three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, the result of which is that several of them at first become, so to say, authorities for other learned beings of new formation, and thereby later for all the unfortunate ordinary beings there. So True River King says Lentroch Hamsanin is a reference to Bolsheviks Lenin Trotsky. The Kashir Itler is his manifesto. Very interesting. Very interesting. We'll keep our eyes on that. So Lentroch Hamsanin. Let's see what his doctrine is. the details concerning the conditions of the arising and subsequent formation of Lenthro-Hamsanen. So that's interesting. Lenin and Trotsky, I wouldn't necessarily... Who's the Bolshevism, but what's behind that is the communism. Maybe this is also a... maybe Lenthro-Hamsanen is Marx as well. Because Marx had some weird things about him. You know, he was a Hegel. He was a Hegelian in the end. So Hegel, the Antichrist himself, the source of all evil. But oh, maybe this is Hegel now. We'll see. Let's keep going. We'll move ahead. Into a responsible being chanced to become clear to me, by the way, during my investigations of which aspects of the strange psyche of your favourites were the basis for the gradual change and ultimately also for the total destruction of all those beneficent special forms and customs in the process of their being existence, which had been introduced and firmly fixed in this process by the ideally foreseeing reason of our omnicosmic, most very saintly Ashiatashaimash. During the period of his self-preparation to be that which he now is for the whole of the universe. I think my wife is texting me. It was... Let me just turn that off just in case. I'm putting you on silent, honey. It was then that I learned that this Lenthro-Hamsanen arose, or as it is said there, was born on the continent Asia, in the capital of Nevia, the town Kronbukhun. Kronbukhun. Bukhun. So maybe being a Bukhun will make you a Hasnamusan. That's one of the... Oh god. Oh no. Tyler says, lol, love to the wife. There you go, honey. Tyler says hi. The conception of his arising resulted from the blending of two heterogeneous exiohari. So remember, exiohari is kind of like the sexual energy, not just the substance, not just, you know, the seminal vapors, but for the woman as well, it's the sexual substance. The sexual energy, you know, the eggs, but everything etheric there as well. Formed in two elderly three-brain beings. So he's the, like... So Lenti is the son of two older beings. You know, like people who just, like... oh, the economic reasons haven't supported us enough yet, so they wait till, like, they're 40. They're 40 and have like, a single kid. So of elderly three-brained Kes-Chapmartnian beings there. His producers, or as it is said there, his parents, having chosen as the place of their permanent existence the capital city of Nievia, take a shot, moved there 3 terrestrial years before the arising of that later universal Hasnamus. For his elderly and very rich parents, he was what is called a firstborn mama's boy, for although the blending of their exioharies had been many times actualized between them before him, so they definitely were doing it, as I found out, they being deeply engaged in the business of acquiring riches, as you do, and not wishing to have any hindrance for this, so... Exactly, had recourse at each actualizing of this sacred blending to what is called tusi, or as your contemporary favorites express them, abortion. Okay, so they just, wow, okay, so these two guys did it a lot and then just were like, abortion. Wow, oh my god, they were liberals. It's funny that also abortion is tusi. What? That's so weird. Anyway. I wonder what Gurdjieff was thinking of in the etymology there. Anyway, that's something to reflect on. Towards the end of his activities in acquiring riches, the source of the active principle of his origin, or as it is said there, his father, had several of his own, what are called caravans, and he also owned special caravanserais, just like groups of caravans, for the exchange of goods in various cities of this same Nivea. I keep on looking at it like that and thinking Nvidia, and I'm like, no, it's not a graphics card, it's a city in ancient prehistory. And the source of this passive principle of his origin, that is, his mother, was at first of the profession of what is called tusij, tusiji. But later, on a small mountain, she organized what is called a holy place, a published broadcast among other beings, information concerning its supposed special significance, namely, that beings of female sex without children would, on visiting this place, acquire the possibility of having them. Okay, so his mother ran a day spa for other wealthy women. It's like, this kind of smacks of like, like rich guys whose wives just start like business ventures. I saw, what is it, a meme the other day where it was like a Winnie the Pooh meme where it's like Winnie the Pooh and then Winnie the Pooh in a tuxedo. Like the Winnie the Pooh was like, I'm rich, my wife doesn't work. And then the one in the tuxedo was like, I'm rich, my wife's business costs me $10,000 a month and I don't care. It's like, this is Lenti's parents basically in a nutshell. This is his dad's just like mega rich and secure, and his mom's just like, yeah, I'm gonna just be, my shaman is telling me to actualize myself. I need to start a holy place, start day spa for like other women, just like a sacred space for other women, like that. This is what's going on. This is basically the thing. This is the world that Lenti is born in. So when this couple, in what is called the decline of their years, had already become very rich, they moved to the capital city Kronbukhun in order to exist there, but only for their own pleasure. But soon, they felt that without a real result, or as they say there, in childlessness, there cannot be full pleasure. Okay, so then they felt it. Then they felt the years. The empty carton of eggs just started looming in their minds. And from that time on, without sparing what is called money, they took every kind of measure to obtain such a result. With this end in view, they visited various holy places existing there for that purpose, of course with the exception of their own holy mountain. Yeah, so they started a fertility spa, and of course their fertility spa didn't actually work, it was just a money sink to steal from others. So it's like, kind of, there's some spiritual people in the New Age world that are hucksters, but then there are some spiritual people who have their own students, but then they go around to other masters to poach actual teachings, but then they still give their students kind of crap, or like they don't take their own advice. It's like, what? Man, this is crazy. This is like almost like a P.T. Barnum, every moment a sucker is born kind of Hasnamusen environment that, Lenti is born into. I almost feel sorry for Lenti. Like, could he really have been anything else? Or this was like the perfect situation of forces to just make him this level of Hasnamusen. And resorted to every kind of, Tyler says, needed to watch Holy Mountain, but I showed you know what? Everyone, each to their own. I know Jodorowsky has made some other stuff, and he's a creative genius, but I freaking hated Holy Mountain. I hated that movie. Ugh. Anyway, plowing it, moving on. And resorted to every kind of what are called medical means, which purported to assist the blending of heterogeneous exia-haris. And when eventually, by chance, such a blending was actualized, then there indeed arose, after a certain time, just that long-awaited result of their later called Lentrohamsanen. From the very first day of his arising, the parents were, as it said, completely wrapped up in what they described as their God-sent result, or son, so they just doted on their child. He was completely spoiled, and they spent vast sums on his pleasures and on what is called his education. I'm getting like, these are just, like Dudley vibes from Harry Potter. Just every birthday, he would have just gotten a sack of presents. Oh, he would have been a fat boy, that fat rich boy who just gets spoiled. To give their son the very best upbringing and education. The earth, I'm imagining him with like a lazy eye, so when he like stares at you, he's like, and his mouth is open. He's a mouth breather. God damn, I hate this guy already. The earth could provide became for them, as it is said, their ideal. With this aim, they hired for him various what are called tutors and teachers, both from among those existing in the country of Niva and from various distant lands. These latter, that is, these foreign tutors and teachers, they then invited chiefly from the country which at the present time is called Egypt. Okay, so they got some Egyptian-like tutors, some masters from Egypt to help them out. Tyler says, "Get out of my head." Sorry, we're same wavelength, same wavelength. Callum says, will Beelzebub's takes help me win over any maidens? Maybe. But first you have to actualize yourself, and the true maiden is the divine feminine within us that we actualize all along. Until then, you must go maidenless. No. We'll see, Callum. Just let's keep it going. Let's plow ahead. So, already, by the time this terrestrial, what is called Papa's and Mama's darling, was approaching the age of a responsible being, he was, as it is said there, very well instructed and educated. That is, he had in his presence a great deal of data for all kinds of being egoplasticori, consisting, as it is usual there, according to the abnormally established conditions of their existence, of various fantastic and dubious information, and later, when he became a responsible being, he manifested himself automatically through all kinds of corresponding accidental shocks. So very interesting. So he kind of just had huge amounts of data and knowledge in him, and then automatic shocks around him crystallized within him. Accidental shocks crystallize within him certain kind of elements. It's interesting because, with Hegel, they talk about how, he was a genius, but at the same time, like, people didn't really know what to make of him. There's, that one story of Hegel where, because he was friends with Goethe, and he came to Goethe's house, and when he knocked on the door, Goethe told Goethe's daughter was there, and Goethe didn't tell his daughter who was coming or who was at the door, and Goethe was just like, bring in the guest, and let's have tea together, and just didn't introduce his daughter to Hegel. Was just like, oh yes, my old friend, just sit down and just discuss. Oh, and here's my daughter, and just didn't introduce them, and just sat down, and they just started having tea and talking, and Hegel would just go off on like random tangents and talk about all this stuff, and then it was like, anyway, I gotta go, and then like left, and then Goethe just turns to his daughter and is like, so what do you make of that guy? And his daughter's like, I don't know if he was a genius or a madman. And then Goethe's like, yeah, that was Hegel, by the way. And the daughter's like, oh. And it's like, yeah, this is the guy who's super famous for being the greatest philosopher or intellect of our current age. And the daughter's like, oh, what? It's like, a name is one thing. People can become famous, but when you meet them and you realize, like, is this Lenti guy actually all there is? Like, to other people, he would seem like super duper intelligent and something amazing and extraordinary, but he's actually just a bunch of muddied water clumped together. Anyway, going off on a tangent here. When this later great learned being there reached the age of responsible being, and although he had indeed a great deal of information, or as it is called there, knowledge, so he didn't have real knowledge, he had information. Nevertheless, he had absolutely no being in regard to this information or knowledge which he had acquired. So this is very interesting. So that with knowledge and being, he hadn't developed his being. He just had huge amounts of knowledge, and his being, his essence, was quite small. Formation. Then because, on the one hand, there was no being whatsoever in his presence, and on the other hand, because there had already by this time been thoroughly crystallized in him those consequences of the properties of the organ Kundavata, so he had a completely twisted sense of love, hope, and faith, which existed there under the names of, vanity, self-love, and swagger, and so forth. The ambition arose in him to become a famous learned being, not only among the beings of Nivea, I don't know why this name is tripping me up. It's like too many vowels, not enough consonants. Come on, Gurdjieff. Nievia? But also over the whole of the surface of their planet. So this reminds me of Meditations of the Tara guy, Tom Berg, where he's like, philosophers are worse than black magicians. Black magicians can enchant a single individual, but philosophers, they curse and they enchant entire nations with their isms. Communism, capitalism, nationalism. Those are the spells that philosophers use to enchant nations. Anyway, so this is what a Lenti is going to do. Lenthro Hamsanen. So, with all his presence, he dreamed and ruminated how he could attain this. For many days, he then thought seriously, and finally he decided first of all to invent a theory upon a topic which nobody before him had ever touched upon, and secondly to inscribe this invention upon upon such a Kashiritzlir as, yeah, I nailed that, as such as nobody had ever before inscribed or would ever be able to in the future either. And from that day, he made preparations for the actualizing of that decision of his. With the help of his many slaves, he first prepared a kashir such as had never before existed. At that period of the flow of time on the planet Earth, the Kashiritzlirs were generally made from one or another part of the hide of a quadruped being called their buffalo, but Lenthro Hamsanen made his Kashiritzlir from 100 buffalo hides joined together, so excess, luxury. That's such a Lenti thing to do. These Kashirlit-ears, oh my god, just stop using this word, were replaced later by what is called parchment. Just say parchment, oh my god. Just say parchment. So, oh no, is this a type of papyrus? But it's a hide. Papyrus is made out of plant. Interesting. Interesting, goes from animal to parchment, which is vegetable. And then you also have tablets, which are stone. Very interesting. I wonder if there's a flow of some evolution there. Anyway, well, then this unprecedented Kashiritlir was ready. The subsequent great Lenthro Hamsanen inscribed upon it his invention concerning a topic which indeed it had occurred to nobody to discuss before, and for which in truth there was no reason why it should have been. Namely, in those wiseacrings of his, he then criticized in every way the existing order of collective existence. This why? This Kashir-Itlir began thus. Man's greatest happiness consists in not being dependent on any other personality whatsoever, and in being free from the influence of any other person, whoever he may be. Man is an island. Man is Hugh Grant from the beginning of About a Boy. So, some other time, I will explain to you how your favorites, the strange three-brained beings there on the planet Earth in general, understand freedom. This subsequent universal Hasnamus inscribed further as follows. Undeniably, life under the present state organization is now far better for us than it used to be before. But where, then, is that real freedom of ours upon which our happiness must depend? So is this a little... Let's see what we can sense in Lenti's doctrine of something, because clearly this sounds like a philosophy. You know, before then, there was a slight mention of Stirner. In like the previous chapter, he mentioned a little bit of Max Stirner. Not by name, but the ego and its own. He mentioned that. So what is this from? Undeniably, life under the present state organization is now far better for us than it used to be before. But where, then, is that real freedom of ours upon which our happiness must depend? I don't know, this sounds more like, you know, that extreme libertarianism of Stirner. It's like, the state exists, but I'm an individual. You know, that it seems like this is more that he's going towards. So don't we work and labor as much now as during all other forms of former state organizations? So I mean, criticization of labor. Maybe that's a little bit of Marx in there. Haven't we to labour and sweat to get the barley indispensable to us to live and not to strive to death like chained dogs? Our chiefs, guides, and counselors are always telling us about some other sort of world, supposedly so much better than here among us, among us, on the planet Earth, on the Earth, and where life is in every aspect beatific for the souls of those men who have lived worthily here on the Earth. So this is a rich boy talking as if he's a poor worker man. So I can kind of, and you know, also, don't trust the kind of the leaders. Yeah, I can kind of see a little bit of Marx in there. So don't we live here now worthily? Don't we always labor and sweat for our daily bread? So criticizing the leaders and the religious institutions. If all our chiefs and counselors tell us is true, and their own way of living here on Earth really corresponds to what is required of their souls for the other world, then of course God ought and even must in this world also give more possibilities to them than to us ordinary mortals. If all that our chiefs and counselors tell and try to make us believe is really true, let them prove it to us, ordinary mortals, by facts. It's this kind of a positivism. He's falling into empirical decadence. I need my sense perceptions. You need to satisfy my sense perceptions. Let them prove it to us, for instance, that they can at least change a pinch of the common sand in which, thanks to our sweat, our daily bread arises into bread. If our present chiefs and counselors do this, then I myself will be the first to run and kneel and kiss their feet. But meanwhile, as this is not so, we ourselves must struggle, and we ourselves must strive hard for our real happiness, and for our real freedom, and also to free ourselves from the need of having to sweat. So he's playing on people's inner yearnings, corrupting their minds with the word freedom. It is true that for 8 months of the year we now have no trouble in obtaining our daily bread, but then how we must labour those 4 summer months and exhaust ourselves getting the barley we need. Lentro is a midwit. No, he is a mid-soul. Yes. That's actually there's like aristocrats of the soul, and then there's just like mid-souls. He is irrevocably mid. Only he who sows and mows that barley knows the hard labour required. Like, he's not even a pleb. He's not a plebeian soul. He's a mid-soul. True, for 8 months we are free, but only from physical labours. The hustle for that bread. And for this, our consciousness, namely, our dearest and highest part, must remain day and night in slavery to these illusory ideas, which are always being dinned into us by our chiefs and counsellors. No, we ourselves, without our present chiefs and counsellors, who have become such without our consent, must strive for our real freedom and our real happiness. We can only obtain real freedom and real happiness if we all act as one. That is to say, all for one and one for all. Okay, so this is the collectivism here. But for this, we must first destroy all that is old. There we go. Is this also a bit of futurism here? A bit of Marinetti? A bit of like, we must burn down that which chains us. We must, break into the Louvre and burn the Mona Lisa. So what is Lenti? Lenti is like a combo of like Marx, Stirner, and Marinetti or something. All the extremists in one. Is that like a triple Hasnamussen? And we must do so to make room for the new life we shall ourselves create that will give us real freedom and real happiness. Down with dependence on others. We ourselves will be masters of our circumstances, and no longer they who rule our lives, and do so without our knowledge and without our consent. Our lives must be governed and guided by those whom we ourselves shall elect from our midst, that is, by men only from amongst those who themselves struggle for our daily barley. What is this? Democracy? Disgusting. And we must elect these governors and councillors on the basis of equal rights, without distinction of sex or age, by universal, direct, equal, open ballot. Disgusting. One of the problems with liberalism, sorry, Milton, but the whole esoteric problem with liberalism is it's based on all men are created equal, in the sense that we all have within us the same nature. And if you've spent time around any esoteric framework whatsoever, I mean, Buddhism is the ultimate one. In Buddhism, there is no fixed nature. Man is in continuous flux. That's the whole point. We don't have a fixed nature. Everyone isn't equal because everyone is in different levels of flux. And that's good, because if someone's a lowly creature, then through development they can rise to a certain level. But you can't then have fixed laws that blanket everything and expect everything to go peachy, because some people will always be then oppressed, and some people will, I guess, be forced to live up to laws that their own nature could never allow them to. OBS. I just got a little mess. Ooh. Okay, sorry. I just got a message on my computer. It was like, OBS disconnected, and I was like, what? Huh? Anyway, the live stream still seems to be going. Cool. And we, yeah, sorry, no. Where am I? Here we are. Okay, let's go. Moving forward. When this subsequent universal Hasnamus Lentrohamsanen had finished inscribing this Kashiritlir, indeed unprecedented there, he arranged an enormous costly banquet to which he invited all the learned beings from all Nivea. Taking upon him banquet, he showed them his Kashiritlir. A little choppy, but okay. Okay, hopefully you got my demented ranting about the end of liberalism all fine, but nonetheless. When the learned beings then gathered at that free feast from almost the whole of Nevia, take a shot, Nevia, saw that indeed unprecedented Kashiritlir, they were at first so astounded that they became, as it is said there, as if petrified, and only after a considerable time did they gradually begin looking at each other with dumbfounded glances and exchanging opinions and whispers. Chiefly they asked one another how was it possible that not a single learned being nor a single ordinary being had known or guessed that there in their own country such a learned being with such knowledge existed. Suddenly one of them, namely the oldest among them, who enjoyed the greatest reputation, jumped up on the table like a boy, and in a loud voice, and with the intonation which had already long before become proper to the learned beings there of new formation, and which also reached the contemporary learned beings, uttered the following. Listen, and all of you beware, that we, the representatives of terrestrial beings assembled here who have, thanks to our great learning, already attained independent individuality, have the happiness to be the first to behold with our own eyes the creation of a Messiah of divine consciousness sent from above to reveal world truths to us. What? Come on. Come on. So this is interesting, though. Hasnamusens love to be considered more than they are. So thereupon began the usual maleficent, what is called mutual inflation. Ah, circle jerk supreme, which had already long been practiced among the learned beings of new formation, and chiefly on account of which no true knowledge which has chanced to reach them ever evolves there as it does everywhere else in the universe, even merely from the passage of time itself. But, on the contrary, even the knowledge once already attained there is destroyed, and its possessors always become shallower and shallower. And the rest of the learned beings then began shouting and pushing each other in order to get near Lentrohamsanen, and addressing him as their long-awaited Messiah, they conveyed to him by their admiring glances what is called their high titillation. Ugh. The most interesting thing about it all is that the reason why all the other learned beings were so greatly amazed and so freely gave vent to what are called their learned snivelings lay in a certain extremely strange conviction which had been formed in the psyche of your favorites, thanks, as always, to the same abnormally established conditions of ordinary existence, that if anybody becomes a follower of an already well-known and important being, he thereby seems to be by all other beings almost as well-known and important as himself. So, clout chasers, baby. Clout chasers. So, it was on the strength of his being very rich, and what is more important, already very famous, that all the other learned beings of that time of the country Nievia immediately manifested themselves approvingly towards this Lentrohamsanen. Well then, my dear boy, when after the said banquet the learned beings of Nievia returned home, they immediately began firstly to speak among their neighbors, and later more and more widely here, there, and everywhere. What are you, Dr. Zeus, Gurdjieff? Come on. About that unprecedented Kashiritlia itself, and secondly, already foaming at the mouth to persuade and convince everybody of the truth of those revelations which that great Lentrohamsanen had inscribed on this Kashiritlia. The result of it all was that the ordinary beings of the town Kronbukhun, as well as of other parts of the country Nievia, talked among themselves of nothing but these revelations. And gradually, as it also usually happens there, almost everywhere, beings became divided into two mutually opposing parties, one of which favored the invention of the subsequent universal Hasnamus, and the other, the already existing and well-fixed forms of being existence. Hold on a second there, and gradually it also happened almost everywhere. Beings became divided into two, one of which favored the invention. Okay, yeah. And the other. Okay, so conservatives and progressives are created. Thus it continued during almost a whole terrestrial year, during which time the ranks of the contending parties increased everywhere and towards each other. There grew one of their particular properties, called hate, the result of which was that one sorrowful day in the town of Kronbukhun itself, there suddenly began among the beings who had become followers of one or the other of the two said mutually opposite currents, their process of what is called civil war. Civil war is the same as war. The difference is only that in ordinary war, beings of one community destroy the beings of another community, while in a civil war, the process of reciprocal destruction proceeds among beings of one and the same community, as for example, brother annihilates brother, father, son, uncle, nephew, and so on. At the outset, during the 4 days that the horrible process was at its height in Kronbukhun, and the attention of the other beings of the whole country of Nievia was concentrated on it, everything was still relatively quiet in the other towns. But here and there, small, what are called skirmishes occasionally took place. What at the end of the 4th day, those who were for the invention of Lentrohamsanen, that is, for the learned beings, were victorious in Kronbukhun. So Lenti's doctrine prevailed. Then, from that time on, the same process also began at all the large and small points of the whole surface of Nievia. That widespread, terrifying process continued until there appeared hordes of learned beings, who, as it is said, feeling firm ground beneath their feet, compelled all the surviving beings to accept the ideas of Lentrohamsanen. True River King says revolution, yeah. And it always starts with the learned beings, i.e. the university lecturers corrupting the university students. God damn. And so there's this intellectual class of people that then think they're undeniably right, irrefutably right. Nivea sounds like San Francisco. Possibly. Very possible. Accepted the ideas, surviving being accepted the ideas of Lenthro Hamsinen and immediately destroyed everything. And from then on, all the three-brained beings of Nievia became followers of the invention of Lenthro Hamsinen. And so this includes destroying all that is old. So Ashiata Shaimash's doctrine most likely got destroyed because of this. Goddamn Hasnamusen. So, if anything is old, and someone wants to destroy all that is old in the past, you need to look at them with suspicion. Sorry, Marinetti, but your futurism is suspicious. And soon after, in that community, there was established a special, what is called, republic. A little later, the community in Nivea, being at that period great and what is called powerful, began, as it also usually happens there, making war on the neighboring communities for the purpose of imposing upon them also her new form of state organization. Spreading democracy, kids. From that time on, my boy, on the largest continent of your planet, the processes of reciprocal destruction among these strange three-brained beings began to proceed as before. And at the same time, there were gradually changed and finally destroyed those various beneficent forms of their ordinary existence which had already been fixed, thanks to the ideally foreseeing reason of our very saintly Ashiata Shaimash. Thereupon, there again began to be formed on the surface of your planet, only to be destroyed anew, and to give place to others, numerous separate distinct communities, with every kind of form of inner state organization. Although the direct effect of that maleficent invention of the now universal Hasnamus, Lenthro Hamsinen, was that among your favorites the practice was revived of existing in separate distinct communities, and they again resumed their periodic reciprocal destruction. Lol. Yet within many of these newly arisen independent communities on the continent Asia, beings still continued to conform in their ordinary existence to many of the unprecedentedly wisely foreseen usages of the very saintly Ashiata Shaimash for their ordinary being existence, which usages had already been inseparably fused into their automatically flowing processes of daily existence. So it's kind of like the ways the folk prevail, there's wisdom in it. And those to blame for the final destruction of these said usages and customs that still remained in certain communities were those learned beings who were then assembled in the city Babylon. God damn. And they were then to blame in this respect owing to the following. When owing to that famous question of the beyond, they organized the general planetary conference of all the learned beings there. There happened to be also among them the learned beings who went to Babylon on their own accord, the great-grandson of Lenthro Hamsinen himself, who had also become a learned being. Ugh. His line continues. And he took with him there to the city of Babylon an exact copy of the mentioned Kashir Itlir, but made on papyrus, the original of which had been inscribed by his great-grandfather, and which he had obtained by inheritance, and at the very height of the frenzy concerning the question of the soul during one of the last big general meetings of the learned beings. He read aloud the contents of that maleficent invention of his great-grandfather's, whereupon it occurred, as it had also become proper to the sorry learned beings of this planet, thanks to their strange reason, that from one question which interested them, they at once passed to quite another, namely from the question of the soul to the question of what is called politics. Lamau. What is this, Plato's Republic? So what was the beings were assembled in Babylon because the leader of Babylon wanted to do alchemy, but then once they were all gathered there, they all started talking about the question of the soul. So it seems this secondary meeting is now the thing that destroys, well, maybe this politics of the soul is then that which destroys the teachings of Ashiata Shaimash. Thereupon, In the city of Babylon, meetings and discussions again began everywhere concerning the various kinds of already existing state organizations, and those which in their opinion ought to be formed. As the basis of all their discussions, they took, of course, the truths indicated in the invention of Lentrohamsenen, this time expounded on what is called a papyrus, that had been taken there by his great-grandson, and a copy of which almost every learned being who was then in Babylon carried in his pocket. What is this, the Red Book of Mao? For several months they discussed and argued, and as a result, they this time split into parties. That is to say, all the learned beings then in the city of Babylon split into two independent what are called sections, under the following names. The first, the section of Neomothists. The second, the section of Paleomothists. Oh my god, it's Mao. Says martial esotericist. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, what's going on? I don't know. So what are Neomothists and what are Paleomothists? I guess the Paleo are the old, and these Neos want the new. But what is a Mothicist? Let's see. Each of these sections of learned beings soon had its adherents from among the ordinary beings in the city of Babylon, and once again, this would certainly have ended also with a civil war if the Persian king, hearing all of it, had not immediately cracked them on their learned noodles. That's funny. I can imagine, for some reason, I can imagine Gurdjieff writing this line, just laughing to himself, just chuckling, like, cracked them on their noodles. A number of these learned beings were executed by him, others were imprisoned with lice, and still others were dispatched to places where even now, as Mullah Nasser ad-Din would say, French champagne could not be taken. Maybe this is an archaic saying, but I guess, that means a place that is not civilized. They were taken to bumfuck nowhere, as we say in Australia. Now, only a few of those who are clearly shown to have been occupied with all this, only because, as it is said there, they were mad. You mad, lol? Tyler says, oh my god, yes, must have felt so good to write that. Indeed, were permitted to return to their own countries, and those among them who had taken no part whatever in political questions were not only also given full liberty to return to their native land, but by the order of the mentioned Persian king, their return to their native land was even accompanied with every kind of honor. So, my boy, well then, my boy, those Babylonian, I could feel it coming. My boy was coming. Those Babylonian learned beings who, owing to various reasons, survived and were scattered everywhere over the surface of almost the whole of the planet, continued by momentum, their wiseacring, the basis of which they made, of course, not consciously, but simply mechanically, those two leading questions which had arisen, and which had been the questions of the day. During the said Babylonian events, namely the famous questions concerning the soul of men and the incommunal organization. So politics and metaphysics are inextricably linked. The result of these wiseacrings of theirs was that over the whole continent of Asia, civil wars again broke out in various communities and the processes of mass reciprocal destruction between different communities. The destruction which thus proceeded of the remnants of the results of the conscious labors of the very saintly Ashiat Shaimash continued on the continent of Asia for about a century and a half. Yet, in spite of this, in some places, there were preserved and even by momentum were still carried out certain forms that had been created by Ashiat Shaimash, for their beneficent being existence. Come on! You can survive, I believe. But when the three-brained beings, there who arose and existed on the neighboring continent now called Europe, then began taking part in the Asiatic wars, and when hordes with the arch-vainglorious Greek called Alexander of Macedonia at their head were dispatched thence, and passed almost everywhere over the continent of Asia, they made, as it is said, a clean sweep from the surface of that ill-fated planet, of everything that had been established and had still been preserved and carried out. So a clean sweep that it left not even the trace of the memory that there could once have existed on the surface of their planet such a bliss. Alas, alas! Specially and intentionally created for their existence by such a reason whose possessor is now one of our 7 most very saintly omnicosmic individuals, in all caps, by the way, and 7 of them. What is that thing about, like, the 7 Zarathustras? There were, like, 7 Zarathustras, and, like, it's a Zarathustra is a title, or Zoroaster is a title, and it's the 7th one is the one that we call the historical one. Is that, like, just like a Manly P. Hall line that he got from Theosophus or something? That just came to mind when he said something about the 7. Anyway, without whose participation even our uni-being common father does not allow himself to actualize anything. Very interesting. 7 archangels that incarnate. And now, my boy, after my tale about this Lentrohamsanen, so also Alexander the Great, his sweeping over destroyed everything previous there, but then he's still weirdly connected to certain things historically, like Alexander the Great. There's some connection between Alexander the Great and the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. Like, Alexander the Great found the the burial site of Pythagoras, and the Emerald Tablet was in there, and so then he moved it into his grave site, and then that was, or something like that. There's some connection there. Because that's the other thing, Ashiata Shaimash, as well as being a connection with Zarathustra, he also seems to be a little synthesis with Zarathustra and also Hermes Trismegistus. So there's some kind of connection there. Also, that's that thing, like, you know, Ashiata Shaimash, his teachings were inscribed on a tablet, and what do we have is the tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which comes to us, the Emerald Tablet that comes to us down from the ages. Very interesting. Very interesting if this is all a kind of reference to the Emerald Tablet thing. It's all in alchemy. The answers are all in alchemy. I remember there's a line, is it in Search of the Miraculous, or like The Fourth Way, where someone asks Ouspensky something, and he says Gurdjieff's cosmology all comes from Dr. Flood, which is Robert Flood, the alchemist. So there's something, maybe. Anyway, so this is just me, just freestyling here. There may be some interesting connections between alchemy, or what we call alchemy as an internal science, and the far-off, long-forgotten teachings. Anyway, and now, my boy, after my tale about this Lenthra thanks to which you obtained, to a certain degree, a no. The hell does conspective mean? The hell does conspection? What does it mean to conspect? I need to know. There is one meaning. Yeah? Okay. The hell, where is this? Conspection is of multiple origins. Yeah, what's the meaning? Oh my god. An overall view survey. Okay, I'm back. Obtained a certain degree, a conspection, an overall view, account of the consequences. Tyler says, alchemy equal hermeticism. So there's this connection. Alchemy is birthed out of hermeticism. And it's interesting because that's, you know, the story of the Taro as well. The Taro is this book of hermeticism. So very interesting. Account of the consequences for, anyway, moving on. Consequences for the subsequent generations ensuing from the activities of such a typical representative of eternal Hasnamus individuals from among the three-brained beings of the planet Earth. It will now be quite opportune to explain to you, as I promised, a little more in detail about the significance of the word Hasnamus. In general, those independent individuals are called defined by the word Hasnamus, in whom, among what are called individual impulses, a certain something arises, which participates in what is called the completed formation or independent individualities in the common presences of three-brained beings, both of the highest possible coating as well as those who consist only of the planetary body alone. This something in these separate cosmic individuals arises and blends in the process of the transformation of the substances in them with the crystallizations resulting from the action of the entire spectrum of certain what are called Naleucnian impulses. These Naleucnian spectrum of impulses consists on the basis of that chief cosmic law, the sacred heptaparaparshinok. Okay. Law of seven, according to the source. So this is interesting. He's talking about the creation of Hannesmusen. So let's pay attention to this. According to the source of its essence, in respect of the perception of engenderings and the resulting manifestations of seven heterogeneous aspects. Okay, this is interesting. If these separate aspects of the entire spectrum of Naleucnian impulses are described according to the notions of your favorites and expressed in their language, they might then be defined as follows. 1. Every kind of depravity, conscious as well as unconscious. Okay. The feeling of self-satisfaction from leading others astray is a Hannesmusen trait. Very interesting. The irresistible inclination to destroy the existence of other breathing creatures. So kids that pull the wings off butterflies, that's they have a Hannesmusen trait. The urge to become free from the necessity of actualizing the being efforts demanded by nature. Okay. So is there... That seems... Now, what does he mean by that? Something clearly not something holy. Maybe this is also like a transhuman thing. Like people who, I want to be immortal. I want to lose the urges of nature. You could also see it as like people who want to suppress the sexual instincts, like they hate the sex. And maybe you could also see it as people like, I want to become, a robot. I want to live forever. Or they want to separate themselves from nature. The being efforts demanded by nature. Very interesting. Okay, so that's 4. 5, the attempt by every kind of artificiality to conceal from others what, in their opinion, are one's physical defects. Ooh, that's an interesting one. So people who get kind of plastic surgery. True River King says living off others. So that's the urge to become free from the necessity of actualizing being efforts demanded by nature. Living off others is number 4. Okay, that's interesting. So if you're a leech, basically, you live off others, that's a Hannesmusen trait. The attempt to artificially conceal your defects is a Hannesmusen trait. Or what you see as defects, or what you think other people would see as a defect. So being fake is a Hannesmusen trait. The calm self-contentment in the use of what is not personally deserved. Hannesmusen trait. The striving to be not what one is. Traits of psychopaths. I mean, that's basically what a Hannesmusen is, but more extreme because it's not just a psychological thing. It's literally they ontologically become a different kind of being that crystallizes within them. Ugh. So someone who has these within them, it's not good. Not good. Striving to be not what one is. That's interesting. Is that a kind of a self-hatred? Because it's not a striving of overcoming. It's just, I don't want to be that. Could that also be a transhuman thing? or like, you know, people who are on all levels, but physical. I am a wolf. Ciro says, arrived, I'm late. Hey, Ciro, how's it going? We just got down and dirty on a whole bunch of stuff to do with Hasnamusens. I guess you got to go back and watch it. Anyway, so this is interesting. This is stuff to stay away from, but also if you notice these things in people, these traits in people, when they give into every kind of depravity, consciously as well as unconsciously, when they have a feeling of satisfaction when leading others astray. So this is also the scam artist. This is the P.T. Barnum, every moment a sucker is born. So that's a Hannesmusen trait. The irresistible inclination to destroy the existence of other breathing creatures. So not just three-brained beings, but just people who, not even like game hunters, because game hunters have their place. And they don't like, it's like you just can't help but just crush it and enjoy like crushing to death something. The urge to become free from the necessity of actualizing being, so living off others, being a leech, being fake, attempting to conceal your defects. I love this one, the calm contentment in the use of what is not personally deserved. Oh, ugh. Like when you have a roommate, back when you're like house sharing in your early 20s and you have a roommate and, you know, you've worked really hard all week and you've made you've made your bachelor chow, like your spaghetti boil, and you've eaten most of it, but you've left like a bowl of it in the fridge for you to eat tomorrow. And then the next day you wake up and you come out and you're like roommates just on the couch, just eating it. And you're just like, oh, sorry, bro, I thought you left this for me. And they just so much satisfaction. You see it on their face and you're like, mother, you goddamn asshole. I'm moving out. Screw you, man. Like that's a Hasnamusen trait. And the striving to not be what one is. Are all furries a little bit Hasnamusen? Possibly. Possibly. Now, this certain something, and so these are the Nalosnian spectrum of impulses. This is a spectrum of impulses that Hasnamusens have. So Hasnamusen may have one of them or all of them, but it's these impulses that arise within them while they're crystallizing higher being bodies. And this creates a double crystallization. So you crystallize objective reason, a higher being body, but you also crystallize this egoic weird demon within you as well. So you could say there's a part of you that appears angelic to people, but there's a part of you that's also demonic. And you just get stuck at that level of creation. So there's certain something which arises in the presences of definite individuals owing to the enumerated Nalosnian. It's hard because there's like a double O here, Nalu, but then there's also an O at the start of Usnian. So is it Nalosnian impulses? Is that what he wants me to do? Nalosnian impulses. Besides being the cause of what are called serious retributive suffering consequences for these individuals themselves, also has the particularity that as soon as the action of what is called intense effort ceases in one of these individuals, the radiations proper to one or other of the aspects of the manifestations of this something have a greater effect on those around him and become a factor for engendering the same in them. Okay, yeah. So that's interesting. Let me just read that again. For these individuals themselves also have the particularity that as soon as the action of what is called intense effort ceases in one of these individuals, the radiations proper to one or other of the aspects of the manifestations of this something have a greater effect on those around him and become a factor for engendering the same in them. So Hasnamusen it's also like a cancer. It's contagious. Exactly, Tyler. It spreads out. If one Hasnamusen acts in a Hasnamusen way, it infects other people around them and it creates more Hasnamusens. It's like Ashiata Shayamash trying to, create, higher beings, and then there's Hasnamusens creating more Hasnamusens. This is, that statement of, like the philosopher Henri Bergson, where he says the world, or like the universe, is a machine that creates gods. It's like, no, the universe, the world, is a womb that creates both angels and demons. Both gods and demons are created, both asuras and gods. And we must decide, we must create ourselves, crystallize ourselves. Oof. Or else, you gotta crystallize correctly, or else you'll become a Hasnamusen, and you'll be an asshole for all eternity. The first kind of Hasnamus individual is a three-brained being who, while acquiring in his common presence that something, still consists only of his planetary body, and who, during the process of his sacred rasguarno, is subject to the corresponding consequences of the presence in him of the properties of this something, and is thus destroyed forever, such as he is. So the first type of Hasnamus individual, it's someone who has Hasnamusen traits, but they don't have any higher being bodies. So they may be through some process of crystallization, but they don't achieve it. And then when they die, they dissolve. The second kind of Hasnamus individual is that Kesdjan body. So they have crystallized an astral body. A second degree Hasnamusen has an astral body of a three-brained being, which is coated in his common presence with the participation of that same something, and which acquiring, as is proper to such a cosmic arising, the property of turin urino, that is, non-decomposition in any sphere of that planet. Sorry, what am I, just a second, let me just step back for a second. Is coated, three-brained being, which is coated in his common presence with the participation of that same something. Okay, so a Nulosinian impulse, acquiring as is proper to such a cosmic arising the property of turin urino, that is, non-decomposition in any sphere of that planet on which he arose, has to exist by being formed again and again in a certain way, such as he is, until this certain something will have been eliminated from him. So because he has a Kesdjan body, because he has an astral body, when he dies, he doesn't disintegrate. He just exists again and again and again and perpetuates as a human, but in misery, until basically that part of him that is Hasnamusen, that part, that those new Lucinian impulses dissolve off of him. This reminds me of a story of a guy I know. He used to do like spiritual talks. I think he still does. And he met some guy, came to his classes who was interested in, you know, psychic powers and development and all of this stuff. But the guy was like a prodigy at astral projection, and he had some like whacked story that he was adopted in Switzerland by a guy who worked for the banks, and he was just in this weird family of like bankers, and they could like all astrally project or something. So this is a story that came to me through someone. So apparently this guy exists. So he may be schizo, but he claimed that he came from Switzerland. He was, his parents weren't his real parents, he was adopted by them, but he could actually project, and so could his parents. And he was trained and became like a banker and stuff. And he became a part of this like banking system, and it was just like, you know, he just learned about business, learned about money and all of these things. And then his story is, he randomly one day happened upon the Elders of the Protocols of Zion or something, and he read it and was like, oh my God, this is real, and I'm a part of it, I'm doing it. Not to promote conspiracy theories or anything, this is just what this one schizo guy thought. And he was like, oh my God. And so he ran away from Switzerland and like moved to Australia. And just kind of like was hiding out in like wanted to like buy a house in the hinterland and just live the rest. And he wanted to like develop psychic powers so other people who astral project can't like find him. And so this is a story, but he could apparently just sit, not even like, you know how people like learn astral projection when you go to sleep, you know, do this technique. No, he could literally sit and then just concentrate in a room and just come out of his astral body. And he could do all these, and he had all these crazy experiences. Like he one day was just like, how long could I stay in the astral? And he went and astral projected and spent, you know, time is in this temporal sense. He spent like a week consciously going through different dimensions and experiencing these different levels of light. And he said he went back because he was like, I wonder how my business is going. And like, you know, came back to his body and, you know, only an hour passed or something like that. And it's like, what? He had all of these amazing spiritual experiences, but it was like, he was always about money. And it's like, what? And he, like, the level of how good he was at business is apparently when he first came to Australia, he went to a printing business to print business cards. And the story is he went to the business and he was like, oh, can you give me this deal? And the guy was like, no. And he goes like, no, come on, give me a deal. Okay. And the guy refused to do it. And so he got so mad at this printing business that he opened a printing shop across from that printing shop and then put the other printing shop out of business just because the guy wouldn't give him a deal. So it's like, whenever I think like this second kind of Hasnamusen is the Hasnamusen who has an astral body and can use it and is just continuously incarnating as a human, it makes me wonder if there's like groups or families of like this second type of individual. Hasnamusen's just in the world and they're in like banking families or something, and they just continuously incarnate and kind of suffer and live bitterly together. Maybe that's the real Epstein Island. It's all the Hasnamusens that were made along the way. Anyway, the third kind of Hasnamus individual is the highest being body or soul. So this is interesting. Remember, Gurdjieff says people don't have soul, they just have essence. So highest being body, there are also different being bodies. Gurdjieff doesn't necessarily get into all the different being bodies because it's something that you can get obsessed by. But think of like the Theosophic Septenary, where they have the astral body, the physical body, so what Gurdjieff calls a planetary body, and then you have an etheric body, and then an astral body. You know, there's a mental body, and then a causal body, and like sometimes Gurdjieff talks about in between, you know, the astral and this body of the soul, this causal body is like a mental body, and sometimes he doesn't, but nonetheless, the third type of Hasnamusen is someone who has soul. They've crystallized the highest being body. They are a causal being. They can create new things. During the coating of which in the common presence of a three-brain being, there's something arises and participates. So it's someone who has full-on, like, they're a master. They're a real master. On the level of a master. But for some reason, they have Nulacinian impulses in them that crystallize. And he also acquires the property of the Turinurino, but this time proper to his highest being body. That is to say, this arising is no longer subject to decomposition, not only in the spheres of that planet on which he has had his arising, but also in all other spheres of the great universe. And he's just screwed now. He can't even dissolve it. He's just like, uh-oh. You're just stuck like that now, as a black magician forever. So the fourth kind of Hasnamus, so maybe this is like internally, the idea of like Archons or the Black Lodge are like assembled of this third type of Hasnamus. And the fourth kind is a Hasnamus individual similar to the third, but with this difference that the Hasnamus of the third kind has the possibility of at some time succeeding in becoming, so to say, cleansed from this something. Okay, so the third type, he can still somehow do it, maybe. Cleansed from this something, whereas this fourth kind such a possibility is lost forever. Okay, so the fourth kind is permanently stuck forever. That is why this fourth kind of Hasnamus is called an eternal Hasnamus individual. So very interesting. So the first kind is just basically an asshole who just dies. Second type is someone who has a Kesdjan body, an astral body. The third type is someone who's basically on the level of like a master, and they somehow become an Hasnamusen as well. So think of like, I don't know, maybe some gurus who even have occult powers, but then they're still found out to like be sexually abusing their students or something. Like that's a third type. And then the fourth type is just someone who's even that third type can't still be purified. Maybe through multiple universes, like the births and deaths of universes and transient through going through time, maybe they can dissolve that crystallization. But a fourth type is just eternal. Like nothing will ever end it. For these fourth kinds of Hasnamus individuals, Darth Vader is a fourth Hasnamusen, is he? Says to River King. I don't know. Darth Vader redeems himself. Maybe Darth Vader is a third Hasnamusen. He's so crystallized and mechanical. He's more machine than man. But then right at the end, he has this chance to redeem himself. And he does. But maybe the fourth kind is the Emperor. That is why this fourth kind of Hasnamus is called... Yeah, sorry. Where am I? So for these four kinds of Hasnamus individuals, owing to their having in their presences this something, the mentioned retributive suffering consequences, pardon me, are various and correspond both to the nature of each kind as well as to what is called objective responsibilities ensuing from the primordial providence and hopes and expectations of our common Father concerning these cosmic actualizations. Marshall Esoter says, a new fear of mine has been unlocked. The fear of becoming a fourth Hasnamutan. Well, just don't be an asshole. I guess also you see the sense of like why spiritual traditions teach morality or ethics first before teaching proper mechanisms of initiation. So it's like they try to get you really hard to erase any being impulses in you that could crystallize and make you a Hasnamusan. So just, you know, don't be a dick or you'll become a dark immortal. For the Hasnamus of the first kind, namely, when this something is acquired by a being still consisting only of just a planetary body alone, the decomposition of this planetary body of his does not proceed according to the general rule. That is to say, the cessation of the functioning in his organism of every kind of sensed impulse does not proceed simultaneously with the approach of the sacred Rascuano, that is death. So this is where you get people who die in bits. Oh, maybe this is like, kind of like, you know, dementia, like your mind goes first, but your body keeps moving or something. Anyway, let's see what Gurdjieff says. But the process of the sacred Rascuano begins in him still during his planetary body, during his planetary existence, and proceeds in parts, that is to say, one by one. There gradually cease to participate in his common presence the functioning of one or other of his separate independent spiritualized locations, or as your favorites would say there, in such a being, first of all, one of his brains with all its apparating functions dies, later on the second one dies, and only then does the final death of the being approach. So I used to be an assistant nurse in a nursing home, and you get all these people with dementia, and it was really weird because, like, at first they'd come and they'd be like normal and you could chat and talk to them, and then you could still talk to them and they would emotionally communicate with you, but the sentences, there'd be no sentence structure, they wouldn't make sense, but they would walk around and be looking for things, and there'd be emotion there. So it's like intellectually, rationally, their rational mind goes, but emotionally there's something still there, and they like talk and they try to emote and they try to communicate, but then eventually that goes as well and they become kind of like walking zombies. I remember, and you kind of just have to feed them and kind of do things, but still their motor cylinder is still there, their motor functions are still there, and there's still a motor memory there. And it's really weird. Like, I remember this one guy, he had complete dementia. He would just sit and like look off in the distance. But if you take him into the bathroom and you put like toothpaste on a toothbrush and you gave it to him and you say, brush your teeth, he would like move and start brushing his teeth. So the motor mechanism is still there. The motor instinctual brain is still there, with the memory of functions are still there, but there's no emotion and no like rational intellect left. So it's really interesting. This is what Gurdjieff is saying is basically dementia is a sign that someone had Hasnamusan tendencies, or they were basically a candidate, or were, in a sense, they had, you know, that spectrum of Nalusunian impulses, that spectrum, they had one or more of those impulses within them. Enough that when they got to an advanced age, that's what gives you dementia. And you don't die in one, you die in parts. Very interesting take. I find that hot. That's hot. That's spicy. So, in addition to this, after the final death, the disintegration of all the active elements of which the given planetary body was formed proceeds firstly, much more slowly than usual, and secondly, with the inextinguishable action only lessened in proportion to the volatilization of the active elements of the mentioned sensed impulses he had during life. Okay, that's interesting. Let me just read that again. proceed first much slowly than usually, and secondly, with the inextinguishable action only lessened in proportion to the volatilization of the active elements of the mentioned sense impulses he had in life. I have no idea what he's saying there. What does even that paragraph mean? Anyway, I think it's saying what I was saying. Yeah, let's go with that. So, for the second kind of Hasnamus individual, that is, when the Kesdjan body of a three-brained being becomes such, the corresponding consequences are that such an indeed unfortunate arising freed from the planetary body of a three-brained being, on the one hand, not having the possibility of perfecting himself independently of and without a planetary coating, does not succeed in eliminating from his presence this maleficent something, even not always acquired by his own fault. So it's not even your own fault sometimes. It's just external circumstances, which something is always, and with everything, in the universe, an obstacle for the correct flowing of the common cosmic trogo-auto-egocratic process. Man, I got that down now. I got that. That just rolls off the tongue now after all this time. On the other hand, owing to the property in him of tur in urino, that is, not being subject to the decomposition in any sphere of that solar system in which he is formed, he must inevitably be again coated in a planetary body, and in most cases with the exterior form of a being of one or two-brained system. Oh, so that's very interesting. So the second type of Hasnamusen, just you forced to become an animal again and again and again. Okay. And in view of the brevity in general of the duration of beings of these planetary forms, and also not having time to adapt himself to a single exterior form, he must constantly begin all over again in the form of another being of the planet, with the full uncertainty as to the result of this coating. Ah, that's interesting. So he may become like an animal, may become like a horse, a dog, maybe like, and then like go down to like being a worm. Would you still love me if I was a worm, guys? If I was a second type of Hasnamus? But then perhaps it says you can, uncertainty is there of like coding again. So it seems there's an uncertainty, but eventually you may become a human again and have another opportunity of coating higher being parts so that you can kind of complete yourself and escape being a Hasnamusen. And as regards the third kind of Hasnamus individual, namely when the highest being body of a three-brained being becomes such, Marshall Esther said, I would still love you. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you. Three-brained being becomes such, and when this certain something participates in his coating, so this is the third being brained. Sorry, this is the third kind of Hasnamusen. Certain something participates in his coating in such a quality that he never loses the possibility of freeing himself from it. The matter is still more terrible, chiefly because he, as a higher cosmic arising, who according to the foreseeing first-sourced principle of everything existing, was predetermined to serve the aim of helping the government of the whole increasing world, and on whom from the moment of the completion of his formation, even when he was not yet perfected in reason, was placed the responsibility for every subjective voluntary as well as involuntary manifestation, has the possibility to succeed in eliminating from his presence this something exclusively only by the actions of the results of intentionally actualized parked duty, that is to say, of conscious labors and intentional suffering. Hence, such a higher being body must inevitably always suffer correspondingly, having already acquired the gradation of what is called the degree of cognition of one's own individuality, until this certain something is entirely eradicated from his common presence. So this guy just incarnates again and again and again. That's another thing I should mention for Marshall. If you're afraid of becoming a Hasnamusen, what is it in the last chapter talking about the doctrine of Ashyata Shaimash? The whole thing is you have consciousness and a subconsciousness, and within the subconsciousness is this principle that is positive called conscience, the emotional part of consciousness. So a part of awakening is to reach into the subconsciousness and activate the conscience, and this is the thing that can guide you. And so that's something that can also help in you not becoming a Hasnamusen. As a place for the suffering existence of such a high order of Hasnamus individuals, the higher sacred individuals have intentionally allotted from the totality of the large cosmic concentrations 4 planets, disharmonized in their subjective functioning, situated in various most remote corners of the great universe. So if you become a third type of Hasnamusen, you just get sent to like other planets to suffer continuously. It's almost like, you know what? Remember like the movie Jet Li, the one? And there's like an evil Jet Li and a good Jet Li, and at the end, the evil Jet Li gets sent to like, what is it, Hades or Tartarus, and it's like this planet where it's just like battle royale forever, and everyone's fighting and pulling each other apart. It's like that. If you become a third type of Hasnamusen, the Sacred Commission is just like, nah, I got the guy out of here. He's gonna like ruin this entire planet if we leave him there. So your being body gets just taken, and you get put onto like, basically with Jet Li in Tartarus, and you just have to like suffer there for all eternity. And maybe if you just sheer suffering, it like burns away the these like impulses in you. Eternal warfare. Yes. One of these 4 disharmonized planets, called Eternal Retribution, is specifically prepared for the Eternal Hasnamus individuals. And so there's one of the 4 planets. This is interesting. One of 4 disharmonized planets. In Kabbalah, you see the Tree of Life, and then you see the Cliff-Off. And the Cliff-Off are seen as hell regions. Sometimes subconscious regions, or sometimes literally hell. Where the Cliff-Off come from are the Zohar. And the thing about the Zohar is it's not a standardized teaching. The thing about the Zohar is it's what's called a doctrine that speaks. What's it called? Doctrine that speaks? It's like one guy comes along and provides commentary. Like there will be a line and someone provides commentary, and in that commentary he'll talk about a whole bunch of esoteric things, and then another guy will come and talk about commentary for that and be like, no, the passwords you use to ascend through the spheres are actually these, and I've had this experience. And all of this lore gets generated through all of these different voices talking and communicating on like just one single line. And this is what the Zohar is. So in the Zohar, Lurianic Kabbalah is an attempt to standardize the Zohar, if you ever hear that term, Lurianic Kabbalah. It's the only standardization of the Zohar. But there are still other Kabbalists that go back to the Zohar and just read the Zohar for the Zohar and try to pull out their own doctrine. The thing is, in the Zohar, there are different Cliff-Off. There are some Cliff-Off that mimic the Tree of Life, so you have 10 Cliff-Off spheres. There are some where it's just 7, and there's one where it's just 4. And that's the first one that's actually mentioned in the Zohar. So it's really interesting that Gurdjieff is like, yeah, there are like 4 planets where if you become an evil person, i.e. Hasnamusen, you get sent to these 4 planets. Just a very interesting tip. It makes me wonder if Gurdjieff had a little connection or had read parts of the Zohar. Because at that time, because Blavatsky had access to the Zohar, there's a bunch of there's some scholars nowadays that academically read like the Secret Doctrine and are like, yeah, it's like 70% Zohar when they talk about Blavatsky now. So if Blavatsky could find it, Gurdjieff definitely should have had access to it. Anyway, one of these 4 disharmonized planets, called Eternal Retribution, is specifically prepared for eternal Hasnamus individuals, and the other 3 for these higher being bodies of Hasnamus, in whose common presences there is still the possibility of, at some time or other, eliminating from themselves the mentioned maleficent something. The 3 small planets exist under the names of Remorse of Conscience. Okay, so Remorse of Conscience, Repentance, and Self-Reproach. Self-Reproach is interesting. Repentance, so metanoia, the complete turning away or complete transformation of individual. Remorse of conscience, so those who activate their conscience can still purify themselves. And self-reproach, is that just self-flagellation? Very interesting. And then again, what's the 4th planet called? Retribution. You just not even your own will, just getting crushed continuously. Here it is, interesting to notice that from among all the highest being bodies which have been coated and perfected in every kind of exterior form of 3-brain being, there have so far reached the planet Retribution. From the whole universe, only 313, 2 of whom had their arising on your planet, and one of these is the highest being body of this Lentrohamsanin. Okay, wow. So there's on planet Retribution, it has, imagine 313 eternal Hasnamusans, and only 2 of them came from our planet. Well, where did these other guys come from? That means there are other planets in the universe that didn't have Kunda buffer, but some similar accident must have happened, and Hasnamusans arose from them. That's really interesting. So our planet is suffering, and it has its own narrative and its own drama, but there are other planets in the universe which also are suffering and in a type of drama and are creating Hasnamusans. So on that planet Retribution, these eternal Hasnamus individuals must constantly endure those incredible sufferings called Inkuranoodle, which are like the sufferings called remorse of conscience, but only much more painful. Yeah, that's what you get, Lenti. That's what you get. The chief torture of the state of these highest being bodies is that they must always experience these terrifying sufferings, fully conscious of the utter hopelessness of their cessation. Oof. 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 It's like, you know, oof, that's tough. It just makes you feel bad for the Black Magicians. 29. The fruits of the former civilizations and the blossoms of the contemporary. Alright guys, I think that's good for today. The brutality, says Tyler. The brutality, yeah. Well, you gotta be hard on kids who just won't learn. You gotta be hard on them. Anyway, that was a pretty damn good chapter. That was very interesting. Very good, very interesting to learn about the Hasnamus. So like that chapter, I think 28 and like 23 have been highlights. What was chapter 23? We learned about the Alcaldan Society. So man, there's some good stuff. There's some good stuff in here. So I hope you guys all enjoyed, appreciated. Thank you for all coming and listening. Thank you for joining me on the journey. Thanks for coming along on the journey. So I'll meet you all guys again next week, same time, same place. Oof. Oof. And yeah, if you want to help support these efforts, help support the channel, once again, one-time donation via PayPal. You can subscribe to the Ko-fi account, become a YouTube member, or perhaps buy some merch. I think I got my merch shop set up. You can find it in the description or go to the channel page. Anyway, I'll see y'all later.